Hi everybody, welcome to another video. My name is Alona. Somehow I never mentioned my name before, but here it is. And in today's video, I'm going to be working on this beautiful 9 drawers mid-century modern dresser. It's Canadian brand Arthabuska and it's in really good shape, but it's been painted black and I want to restore it. I tried to scrape the paint, but it didn't really work, so the only option I had was a stripping. And if I strip, I don't really clean the piece, it doesn't make sense to me, unless it's really dirty and there's like spider webs, mold and stuff like that on the piece. But usually I vacuum or wipe the dust and give it a good clean after stripping. When I restore the pieces, I can usually use up to 3 coats of stripper, especially if they're painted, but for this one, 2 coats were enough. And then I just cleaned it with mineral spirit and I was so happy that I'm not gonna be sanding a lot, but wait for my epic fail. I let the dresser dry and then sanded it with 220 grit sandpaper. There was one large scratch in the middle of the dresser and there were some scratches on the sides. I used my iron and damp cloth to raise the wood grain. And then I sanded the top one more time with 220 grit sandpaper. And remember how this top looks now. Nice and beautiful wood grain. A rich color. Everything's perfect. Because next morning I found this top looking like this. I worked outside and it was gonna rain and I didn't have room in my basement because I was working on another piece down there. So I left this piece outside and I wrapped it in 2 layers of tarp. No holes. And I've done this before and never ever anything happened. And it rained at night, but the morning was pretty hot and I unwrapped it around 11 o'clock. And I think there was a condensation, but I'm not too sure. Maybe it was rain. And this spot I'm clamping on the video, the water raised the fiber in a particle board, but the spot was still wet and I could save it just clamping it down. And I didn't have wood hardener on me. I had Gorilla Glue, which is activated by water, and it worked. So yeah, more sanding. First I sanded the whole top with 120 grit sandpaper. And my next step was supposed to be an oxalic acid, but there was one problem, I didn't have it. I had ordered it on Amazon and it was still on the way to my house, so I improvised. I decided to use a stripper and a toothbrush, and it did work actually. It took me about 1.5 hours of rubbing and wiping, rubbing again, wiping again, but finally I was ready to sand. And I know it looks awful on this footage, but I promise after sanding they won't be noticeable. And yes, I sanded the top 3 more times with 120, 180 and 220 grit sandpaper. And finally the top was ready, a little bit of hand sanding and I could start working on the drawers. I repeated the same steps on the drawers, except getting rid of watermarks because they were safe. It's stripping, sanding, more stripping, more sanding. I tried to take the door spools off, but they were glued pretty well and I couldn't do it without breaking them, so I ended up stripping them from inside and it was quite challenging, but I had no other choice, I couldn't leave them like that. One of the drawers has this lovely message, but no, I'm not keeping it. The other drawer had a big scratch and I used the same ironing method I used for the top. And here's true story. While I was working on the front of the dresser, I was absolutely sure that this frame is now visible. I was absolutely sure that the drawers sit close to each other. I don't know why. I was probably distracted by those watermarks and yeah, I get confused. And because it was so hard to get rid of this black paint from this wood, and the wood itself was different than the wood veneer on the drawers and on the top, so I decided to refresh it and stain it with ebony stain. Remember, I was absolutely sure they will be not visible. I stained the frame off camera and started working with the legs. I wanted the original color of the piece would be a little bit darker, so I decided to do a paint wash. And if I have the right color of the paint, I prefer to do paint wash over staining because first of all, it doesn't smell, and second, it dries faster. For the paint wash, I mixed the paint and the water in 1:1 ratio and then applied it on my dresser and wiped it right away. On the top of the dresser, I worked in sections because it's bigger and I didn't want my paint to dry off. When my paint was dried out, I lightly sanded the dresser with 600 grit sandpaper. For the top coat, I used the Otis oil, and that was the first project when Otis oil didn't turn out blotchy in 24 hours. My best guess it's because of paint wash. I think the water from paint wash failed kind of moisturize the dry spots on the veneer. That's why the Otis oil dried out evenly. The jurors were super thirsty, so as usual, I applied Bivox and orange oil inside and outside of the jurors. And I was almost ready to show you the final result. That's what I thought. But then I put the jurors back, and that's what I found out. The frame is visible. I couldn't believe that I messed up, but now I had to fix it. And I did like that the frame was darker than the jurors, but I didn't want it to be that dark. The reason why I didn't sand it down, it's because I kind of wanted to keep this black shade. I used three different products, Mineral Spirit, and two different brands of Restore Finish. That's how actually Restore Finish works. It thins the topper layer of whatever you're trying to restore. It makes all scratches on the surface disappear. So it works like acetone or mineral spirit, but just softer. And because there's some pigments in these products, I think my stain, and at the same time, I kind of stain the wood in a brownish color with those pigments. Then I add one layer of my paint wash. Wasn't happy how it turned out, and then I just was improvising with different color of the stain. And now we're finally ready to see how this piece turned out. Let me remind what I started with, and here's the final result.